This episode contains sensitive topics. Discretion is advised. Alright, welcome in, gentlemen, women, non-binaries, everybody. Today, we have with me, Puce. We've got Alt.
Hi.
And Minka.
Hello.
And today, we decided to have a guest. Winter, would you like to introduce yourself?
Yes. Hello. How's everybody doing? I'm Winter Charm. I guess this is kind of odd because I'm a pre-debut VTuber, but
Same.
I've been kind of busy with I've been kind of involved in the community in a bunch of different ways, and I've been collaborating with a lot of streamers lately, as I kind of just understand the VTubing space better. And yeah, a person by the name of Juvian, whose episode some of you might have heard, was the one that suggested I jump onto this podcast and connected me to Puce, and that's how we got started.
Well, to be fair, it wasn't just because you're a pre-debut VTuber. You mentioned specifically you're an ex-doctor BDSM club person.
That is also correct. So it's kind of interesting for me, as I've tried to keep my professional and personal lives very separate. But interestingly enough, you tend to find kind of that culture in the most interesting places. And one place I ran into it way more than I thought I would was medical school. Enough that I decided that I wanted to start a club with some people there. So that's kind of how that happened.
No, it's fascinating. That is not a place that I necessarily would have thought of a bunch of people meeting like that.
Yeah, it's kind of interesting, but you know how there's the whole reputation thing of just the quietest people are usually the kinkiest, and or the quiet nerdy types are really kinky usually. I found that to be mostly extremely true, and it just turns out medical school is full of quiet nerdy people.
That sounds fair.
I'm gonna write that down for when I go visit my friends and at their college next week.
Can find the dorm full of the quietest, shyest people.
No, just the fucking. Well, first of all, the fucking weebs. See who's single. We're gonna start with the weebs, and then go to the medical people and be like, "Hey, yo, I know your secret." But I have a question. Why are you an ex-doctor? How does that work?
So So I have this bad habit of starting companies wherever I go, and at some point during medical school I started a company, and basically at the end of medical school I had a choice if I could either go do residency and be a doctor, or I could run that company, and so I chose to run the company because at the end of the day that's the thing I had built that I'd worked really hard on, and it's I've always been the type to follow my own path. It just didn't make sense for me to take the prescribed route of doing things.
Please tell me you were not in student loan debt.
At the time I was, but it still made sense, and I still have a little bit left, but it's not that much anymore.
Because
I know
medical school ain't cheap, and you were just you got to the end and went, nah, fuck this shit. And I'm what?
Yeah, I mean,
What?
pretty much. It's a decision I agonized over a lot, but at the end of the day, I think it was the right call. And
Do you have a master's or a doctorate?
so I have my 2 undergrad degrees, I have my 2 master's degrees, and I have the doctorate for medicine but I just don't practice because I didn't do residency and I don't have a license. So
Damn.
I
have no words for that. Just damn.
Yeah, sorry. I like to collect degrees. It's there's 2 things in life I collect, right? Subs and degrees. That's pretty much it.
No. I got one. I actually just fucking found it this morning and went, I should throw this away.
I don't know. Yeah, this is the thing of just degrees alone aren't useful. I think it's much more what you do with them, and because I really don't think anyone finds their degree useful for getting anything past their first job. Like, it just doesn't matter at that point, you know?
Man, haven't even got that far yet. I'm stuck here.
I mean, I feel like with the economy as it is right now, everyone's kind of stuck. It's a shit show out there. So
yeah.
I totally feel that.
Yeah.
It's a shit show. That's not anyone's fault, to be honest.
Yeah, you hear that? Pews, you should be paying me. I have a degree in this.
Once we start making money.
Yeah, I know. That's the joke.
Well, that's also, I mean, you know, monetization of content is quite challenging. This is something I've been thinking about a lot as I like think about putting together stuff for content creation and streaming. But I think ultimately, like, I'm doing it for fun, and if like there's money involved, that'll be great. But otherwise, like, I don't really mind that much, and that's kind of how it's the same approach I took to the BDSM club, and then like at some point it turned into a whole thing where there was absolutely like money involved, and just because like a club has to purchase equipment and like host parties and do things, and that requires funding. But I think you reach a certain level of scale, and then it like actually makes sense to do that.
Yeah, that makes sense. Adult content's a little harder even to monetize, but we'll find a way.
Yeah, I mean, I know a lot of like,
hope so.
yeah, so like it's so true, and I think like over time, it's like people have found like that there's these content niches that seem to make sense. VTubing is this interesting space where like I don't know if my like VTubing streams and stuff will make any money, and I frankly don't really care. But what has happened is over the years, like some of the spicy audios that people commission from me, you know, some people pay me to dom them, and other people just have like paid club dues over time because the club still runs, and you know, while I'm no longer like physically there, I do still run parts of it, like the administrative side and other things. Yeah, I'm curious, like, what questions everyone has about this whole side of things, because there's a lot we could talk about, but like, yeah, I mean, we could go over like why a club, like sort of what safety and other things were involved in, and all sorts of stuff like that, or we can go into like the practicals of like, you know, what makes her.
The true test is having Minka put you under the radar.
Hold on, before we get to all that, how did all of this start? Because I can't imagine walking up to my coworker and go, "Let's start a BDSM club. I know you're into some weird shit." How did that happen? Because that'd get me fired. That'd get me written up.
No, that's completely fair. So I was on student council, and it was a student council like running joke for like at least 2 or 3 months, because like someone made one offhanded joke during a meeting, and you know, our student council in medical school included like the medical school, the dental school, the nursing school, the PA school, and the physical therapy school, and then there was a nearby law school. And because we were like part of student council and we did like community outreach stuff, and you know how like student council members would be involved in things like charity events and so on, right? So we made connections with the nearby law school, and there's like a couple other colleges in the area, and like people from those schools and us like met at a bunch of volunteer events, and we just all kind of got pretty close. It's different than a work context, really, right? Because it's like when you're a student and you're on a student council type thing, and you meet other people doing the same thing at other schools, you get to talking, and then once people are friendly enough, like, you know, someone makes an offhanded joke, and then it becomes a running joke, and then at some point, like, there has to be one crazy person in the room that's like, you know, we're all joking about this, but like, what if we did this? And that's pretty much what happened. I was that one crazy person in the room, to be very clear.
So like, someone tried that at my college, and that shit got shut down fast. I'm like, that's interesting. Off to Anime Society I go to watch fucking hentai and Spirited Away. Whatever the fuck Ghibli movie of the week it was.
So wait, what happened with the club that they started there? Like, how did that get shut down? I'm really curious now.
You asking the wrong person. Because I'm like, that's interesting. And then a week later, we ain't a club no more. I'm like, well, all right, man.
Sounds like you had slightly better efforts, Winter.
Well, I mean, I don't know. I think we tried to be very smart about this. So a couple things, right? So one is like officially it was a fancy dress club, not at all a BDSM club, but like officially, it's like, oh, here's just
Smart.
a fancy fancy dress like social club. I think that's a good place to start. Seems relatively chill and non-harmful. Really, like initially, it was more discussions than anything else. So discussions about what people had tried, so on, things like that. People wanted to practice flirting, intimate conversation, things like that, right? It's like, okay, like here's a bunch of people who are generally just like really hardworking, nerdy students, but like at some point, everyone wants to go out and date and find a partner and do things, and that requires like you need to know how to flirt. You need to know how to like actually like set up good dates, and I don't mean the like not the pickup artist bullshit. I hate that stuff so much. Like I hate it with a burning passion. But more just like how do you set up a good date? Like what's a good flirting like? Why do you like and as typical type A students, you learn to break everything down in like a very weird sciencey way that only like type A students could possibly do. Um, and it's because we don't know any better, like to be honest, right? It's like for everyone else, I think some of this comes like intuitively or naturally, but I think most of us on the like type A end of the like type A overachieving student end of the spectrum, like we all struggle a little bit with social stuff, and so we had a lot of learning to do, and at some point like the flirty conversations progressed, and so did some other things, and I think like the reason we were able to stay operational as a club and not like ruin everything for everyone is I think somewhere along the way I managed to convince everyone like, hey, like if we're gonna do this part of the club, like one, we need like really strict rules. We need additional like levels of safety and like kind of almost an interview process to make sure that people who we invite into this part of the club understood the rules of safety and how to do this in a way that wouldn't like harm others. Because really, I think like the risk these clubs run from getting shut down is usually someone crosses a line or doesn't respect consent, and that's an instant death flag for the club, right? Like that instantly destroys the club. People leave, the reputations are ruined, and the school administration will step in and just shut that shit down like immediately. So we were very careful to try and prevent that, and to build better safety. And I think honestly, like safety is the number one concern if you're going to run a club like this, because like if you have people that don't understand or respect consent, like that's a huge problem. And unfortunately, like the BDSM community does have those types of people in it, and well, the only thing you can do is like filter very carefully to keep them out.
You're speaking Minka's language there, Winter. She loves that word.
Oh, yeah, I do.
Oh, yeah, we're all about consent.
Winter, you don't have to give like a specific answer if you're not comfortable with it, but out of curiosity, are you like age range? Are you Gen X, millennial?
Interesting. So I'm in like I'm in my like late 20s, which is weird because like
Okay.
in terms of
what am I doing wrong?
So you're a customer.
Yeah, like right on the border. Like I think I miss being like Gen Z by like 2 or 3 years, which is really sad because I feel like I relate more to Gen Z than to like the millennial group.
Agreed.
The opposite. I can't keep up with these young whippersnappers.
Well, see, and the reason I ask is because like some of these things you were talking about, like based on my own experiences with having lived at two different BDSM clubs, having helped run one a little bit, like some of these things you were talking about just kind of like made me tinge a little bit, because a lot of the places that in interactions I've had, most of the people in power were generally Gen X or even Boomer. So like a lot of the things are twisted and not actually up to the consent regulations that really should be. And so that's why like a lot of problems became rampant in the community in my state. It's just because there were people that were just like, oh, like, well, this is the old way and we've got to respect the old way because we've got to respect history. Or like, oh, this person, yeah, they might have done this one or two bad things, but like they've done all this good stuff for the community. And so like all of this stuff was able, like the people in charge let fly. And so when you started talking about it and everything, I was like, I feel like actually, yeah, that you're probably a little bit younger, because it actually sounds like you and the people you were working with were coming up and just being like, yeah, we're not going to tolerate that shit. And to me, like, I love that, because that's what we tried to fight for. But, you know, much like our country, until these older people start dying off, like, there's not a lot we can do unless we start our own spaces.
But no, I think, like, you make a really good point here. There is definitely this, like, old way of doing things that I just couldn't, like, I didn't really ever... So I never joined those types of clubs for exactly that reason, right? Like, I always felt like it just didn't vibe with me, the way people were treated and the way certain things are done. And it was like, I'd watch that community from periphery and, like, was curious about it, like, when I was in undergrad, but I just, like, never really vibed with it for exactly the reasons you're talking about. It's too traditional, too controlling, and like, you see the controversy that comes out from, like, some of these clubs, and it's like, oh, it was a cult, and, like, there's all this awful stuff going on. I wanted to stay as far away from that as possible. And, you know, everyone I talk to, I mean, you have to remember, like, these are honors students at medical schools, at, like, law schools, dental schools, things like that, right? We're all, like, interested in doing things the right way. We're all interested in, like, doing things well, doing things safely, and kind of came up with all the rules on our own, kind of created our own little model of, like, how are we going to manage, like, consent and safety and other things. And for us, it was like parties where any sort of play was involved. It was really obvious because the invitations would always say that you had to wear masks. And that allowed for people to, you know, participate in activities where, like, taking photos was okay, and other things like that. Assuming, like, you know, all faces and everything were obscured.
Right.
And that's why, like, that worked out. But also, like, you know, it's a, like, if an invitation says that you have to wear a mask, like, you now know that, like, putting that mask on is part of the consent process. And that was a rule that was created because, like, you know, it's like it's a very conscious thing, and it's outwardly displayed as, like, a, hey, like, I'm putting this mask on, everyone else can see it, right? So it's, like, very obvious that I'm consenting. And if I choose to take that mask off and leave the party, like, it's very obvious to everyone, hey, I am withdrawing consent, right? Like, and there's no, like, confusion there of what is meant or not meant by, like, putting on or taking off a mask. Mm-hmm. And so that, like, I think solved a lot of the, like, immediate issues. I think the other thing is, so we did interview every single person who wanted to join the masked parties, and we just called them masked parties because, like, that was kind of the only thing we could say officially in any, like, club materials.
Right.
But and I interviewed people one-on-one, and the way the interview worked is you'd have a panel of 5 of us, and we would sit down, and we'd all be wearing masks, and you were expected to dress up and come to the interview in a mask. So there were two reasons for this. One is we wanted to eliminate any bias, right? So it's like, you don't really know who you're interviewing. Only one person of the 5 would know, and they would not vote. The other 4 would vote. But then also, the interviewee didn't know who was interviewing. So they couldn't, like, play to, like, they couldn't get, like, advice ahead of time for, like, how do I answer to, like, pass this interview? Or they couldn't, like, potentially pay someone and sway them to pass the interview. Because, like, that kind of stuff also happens, unfortunately, in some of these communities. And those 2 safeguards meant that we could actually interview people for, like, what their understanding and ideas around consent were, how they viewed safety, how they, like, understood, and, you know, how they understood certain questions and answers. And like, for example, like one of the questions I would often ask in these interviews is, you know, who's really in charge during the session? Is it the dom or the sub? And I wanted to, like, see how people responded, because, like, your understanding of that will dramatically change, like, how I'd evaluate you for, like, inclusion in the club or not.
Yeah, there's if you know how to ask the right questions, it's usually fairly easy to tell whether someone actually gets it or not.
Exactly. Exactly. And then that's so important because like you can't create a place where people, especially like shy, nerdy students, like feel safe to try things out. Um, if you don't create like an inclusive and really safe space, like where if you don't exclude the people who will absolutely break that trust. Yeah,
Yeah.
so that was a lot of the work that went into and then beyond that it was like I taught a lot of classes on safety because safety is super important, and
Mhm.
knowing how to do things safely is really really important for like good play, you know.
Yeah, no, honestly, like I love everything I'm hearing. Cuz the there were two kind of like the state community was kind of one thing, but then there were obviously like little fractured parts depending on the area and everything. And the second one that I ended up in, honestly, like one of the first things that was very kind of red flag for me was that even amongst the larger community, they were like, well, if you're not part of this specific sub community of it, then like you don't get to know any of the things we're doing or like how we run things or any of this stuff. Like it was all very like our secrets are our secrets. And so I finally ended up getting into that group, and like there was obviously that, oh, I'm new, like this is exciting, but the more and more I learned, the more and more I was like, this is not good. Like that neurodivergent paladin in my head started to be like, I'm seeing some issues here. And the longer and longer time went on, the more issues there were. And like the sad part is like there were a lot of things that I wanted to try to step up to like point out and call out, and even people that like I trusted or was in relationships with would be like, oh well, we've already tried that, it didn't work. So if you speak up, like you're probably just going to end up getting kicked out, stuff like that, like because they had also been manipulated and gaslit into being quiet. And it eventually got to the point where there was this one specific member who had a lot of power himself, but then the people that had even more power than him also protected him, even though he was a sexual predator in the community. And
Oh no.
eventually is the reason that that whole community in our state fell apart, is because like they weren't doing anything, and then there was also stuff that the person above him who kept him safe did that everybody else just kind of finally like drew their line, and so the whole thing fell apart. But like that guy even tried to threaten to sue me once for defamation, and it was a complete joke because like the lawyer he paid to write a letter, like everything in the letter was complete was just lies and everything. But like that was his thing, is he had money and he would get people to disappear or shut up by bullying them out or by threatening them financially. It was built on a flawed system with flawed people. And so like ever since then, you know, and this was only even not even a year ago, like half a year ago.
Mhm.
And I since then have just kind of been like, I don't really care to be in any community anymore because of how bad this was. But like hearing somebody like you, where it's started by this younger generation, and it's just like, yeah, we're not going to put up with that bullshit, and like we are going to make sure this is a safe place. And obviously those types of systems, new systems, can always end up still with some issues. um,
Sure.
but like one of the big things was this tribe is what they were called. um, like they also, the higher ups refused to really change anything. um, and it was
Yeah.
also a multi-state thing, so they're like, oh yeah, no, like you, like it's not our place as this head to necessarily like make sure everything in each state is running fine. But then they would also say, oh, but you're not allowed to do this or make these decisions, or like if this person holds a certain rank, you can't do anything about it and stuff. So like it was this huge flawed system. um, and the
Yeah.
biggest thing was just that they were unwilling to change, and change is what has to happen because the world changes, we get new information, like we learn how things work better. And if that doesn't change, then yeah, you become one of those systems that's just like, oh well, this is the way we used to do it, so it's how we're going to do it. So it just
Yeah.
like, obviously I'm info dumping here just because I'm like, I'm excited to hear about like what you and your friends have done. Like I think that's really cool.
Right. Like so there's two things I would encourage for anyone who's listening to this and is like part of that like sort of cusper like Gen Z or like super late millennial like generation. I would honestly say like you have to take ownership and agency of like if you want a safe space, like you almost have to create it yourself. And it just unfortunately, because like a lot of the existing clubs and systems out there, as Minko was saying, like they have a lot of problems. And everything that Minko was saying, like unfortunately have seen across multiple clubs in multiple states for multiple reasons. And it's just disappointing because this is exactly the thing that we were most afraid of. Because like unfortunately, like any BDSM club with like a pretty young membership like becomes a bit of a target for those people to get into, right? And it's just unfortunately for the grossest reasons. And so the first thing is like we basically didn't have anyone in the club that wasn't already at one of these colleges and wasn't a student, because like we didn't even want to chance it with like someone from an existing club or anything like that getting in and bringing potentially like some of the other like disclosing the locations of parties and stuff like that, and bringing people from those other clubs into that space, because that could be a huge safety issue. So this was a student only thing,
which is absolutely true, because especially like the more predatory kind, like once they go to a group long enough that group kind of figures out like, oh, this person isn't safe, they'll just move on to the next one.
Exactly. And so we just, from the very beginning didn't let people in who weren't at one of these professional schools. So it was undergrad and graduate students only. And because the club was ran by like people on student councils of every school, right? Like it was much more, it was much calmer and much more like well-reasoned. And we wrote the rules from the ground up and like had many meetings with everyone to like kind of agree to a rule set that made sense. We kept the rules very simple. It's like you have to like, there must be an obvious way to show and withdraw consent. There must be like really obvious ways to tell who's down for what, who's not down for what. So we also had a colored bracelet system where you could like, if you said like if you were wearing a green or a yellow bracelet, you were either there to learn. So if you're green, you're there to learn. If you're yellow, you're there to watch, but not participate. And then like pink was like you could be approached to participate. And people would wear these bracelets. So it's like you always have the mask on, and that was like your I consent, I don't consent symbol. And then the bracelets were always like, what are you there for, right? Because some people just want to vibe, right? Like they just want to hang out and watch and talk. Other people are there to learn. It's like, oh, I want to like learn about bondage and rope safety, and so I might like observe a session, but like I might also ask questions. And then people running a session could say like, hey, like this isn't a learning session. So if you're here to learn, like I won't be pausing to answer questions or anything like that. And then those people could like choose whether to stay or not, and it was very like, because of that sort of like approach to, hey, it's like really obvious to everyone what you're there for, what you're supposed to do, what you're not supposed to do. We allowed like people were able to explore in ways that they felt safe doing. People were able to explore things that they wouldn't otherwise try, and potentially with people they wouldn't otherwise try it with. And at the same time, like we also just outright taught classes. And so one of the ways the club raised funds is we would do paid classes where like you could not only like bring a partner and practice with them, or like we'd pair people up in the class, and they would try things like shibari and other stuff like that on each other, with like 4 or 5 instructors standing by for safety with like the safety scissors and the like dive knives, so you can like quickly cut rope if someone goes too tight, and it's like super safe places to explore, where it's like literally put together like demos and like slide decks for like, here's how you do, like this is bondage 101, like here's how we do things. But that was cool because like the other thing is we didn't let anyone participate in an activity if they hadn't attended safety classes. And that was on purpose.
Good.
So you had to attend the class and like actually demonstrate that you could do things safely before you were cleared to participate. And so you would only earn a pink bracelet for a type of activity after you had demonstrated to an instructor that you could do it safely. And even then, your very first session, you had to be supervised by an instructor. So, and this, like, obviously, like, this meant some people did a few less things because they were too self-conscious and didn't want supervision, but it's like, okay, that's great, but you can do that on your own time. I didn't want that at the club. You know what I mean? Where it's like, if you're going to involve other people at this club, like, the expectation is if this is your first time tying someone up, you will be supervised. And if you don't agree to that, that's fine. You can just watch, but you're not going to tie anyone up. You're not allowed to. And we were very strict about this. In the history of the club, we only had 2 safety incidents. So for the like 8 years that it's been running, we've only had 2 safety incidents. And they were relatively minor, where it was like someone demonstrated really well what they could do in a class, and then they kind of forgot some of the basic safety things, and we had to like stop mid-session. But again, it was like the only thing they had to do there was like retake the class, right? And we had to remind them like, hey, like the next time you take this class, like make sure this doesn't happen again, because if you have too many safety incidences on your record, like we will ask you to leave the club. We've never had a major safety incident. So what I consider major safety incidents, like breach of consent or something like that, right? Where there's like serious harm done to a person. We've never had one of those. And to this day, like the club's record is incredibly clean because of just how careful we are about who we let in and how we run things, the rules that we created. And it's like not perfect, right? Like there are things like I wish we could be more inclusive of like letting people try new things, but it's just unfortunately like unless someone creates a class on it first, like we don't allow for it. And so we have classes on like all the basics that you'd expect, right? Like a lot of the bondage, a lot of the impact play, other things like that. Some of the more kind of like out there classes we did was one person I dated in medical school was in the knife play. So we did a knife play class, and that was really interesting. But that was one where like I wasn't comfortable like having people like demo and try stuff out because I thought there's like too much that could go wrong. So we actually had like plastic knives coated in paint for like the demo stuff. And that was one where like you were allowed to do that with only like plastic stuff and never with anything that was sharp and could hurt someone at the club, just because we didn't want to risk it. And we used red cosmetic paint for a lot of knife play stuff because we were just like, that's a line that I don't want to risk crossing ever. It's just like too much of a safety issue for people who aren't experienced enough to like do that safely and carefully.
See, and like I there's that part of me that's like, oh, but like some of these things that like I've done, you know, I would never have been able to do there. But like there's that bigger part of me that's like, I actually really appreciate that because like it seems like you guys actually gave a fuck about the other people attending, whereas a lot of these communities are just like, we're gonna kind of regulate what happens, but really we're just also here to get our rocks off, and so like just don't be stupid so we can have fun. And it's like, no, if you're going to be the people running something and be in charge, you need to have that responsibility.
Yeah, there's a certain level of responsibility that it's just like is up to you to create.
Yeah, so I think that while it may limit some of the play that can happen there, I do feel like it is the better way, because the reality is BDSM and kink can be dangerous, and doing that in a public setting, you know, like especially at a location that someone is providing, like that can be very dangerous and end up with liability for a lot of extra people.
Exactly. Not only that, but like the net benefit from allowing certain types of play is far outweighed by like the number of people in the community that could be impacted by it negatively, especially because like you kind of I feel like people don't pressure test their own rules well enough a lot of times. Like, so what I mean by pressure test is like the same way like a hacker looks at code and says, oh, I can break that if I like do these things, right? Or like the same way like a lawyer looks at laws and like tries to find loopholes to like get a client out of trouble. You should look at the rules for any BDSM club and be like, if someone wanted to abuse these rules, how would they do it? And one of the things we realized very quickly is like, look, the rules allow for one class where you have to like demonstrate safety, but like, what if we run a class on a relatively unsafe activity and like someone is demonstrating safety, but then there's an accident, and it's like you have two complete newbies that hurt each other, right? Because we're like doing something like knife play. That's a nightmare scenario for everybody, right? Like that's super bad. We'd never want that to happen. And so at some point it's like the decision was made, okay, like we cannot have that activity unless it's with like plastic knives and like cosmetic paint, like the kind you'd use in like VFX, right? So you can still like simulate blood, you can still do stuff like that, but you absolutely cannot hand anyone something that they could actually harm another person with. Just because there's like too much that could go wrong. And so the way we did this actually, so there's kind of two types of knife play. So there's like knife play and then blood play, right? Where you're like using the edge of the knife to cut away things and to show that you can do certain things to a person or whatever else. And then there's like the blood play stuff where you're actually trying to draw blood. We absolutely disallowed blood play. We did not allow it at all for obvious safety reasons, right? But with knife play, like what we did was we'd coat the blades with cosmetic paint, and then would like have people show that they could like safely cut clothing off of others. And we use like very sheer, like very breakable clothing, right? But it's like, can you show us that you can cut this off of someone without touching their skin? And it's like if you leave paint marks on their skin, like you obviously didn't take enough care to do this carefully, right? And so you can like you can actually evaluate and grade someone, like how safe are they approaching knife play.
That sounds stressful as fuck.
Yeah, but like
someone with shaky hands,
Yeah, but that's your responsibility as a dom, right? It's like if your sub is like willing to undergo knife play, like you need to keep them safe. It is your job, and so you have to like approach it with that level of responsibility. And you know, we absolutely like that was one of the hardest classes we taught, and maybe had like a 27% pass rate. I think if I remember, like 25 or 27% pass rate. Where like several people would repeat it because they just didn't like do well enough at their practicals. But that's okay. Like the whole point of that is like, we don't want anyone participating in an activity that they have not clearly demonstrated they can do safely. And then, so there was that whole thing. The other thing we always did was everyone had, so the other problem some of these clubs run into is people will often change their safe words for different partners. People will often forget the safe words of like whoever they're playing with, right? So and these are like, this is not usually a thing that happens. What I will highlight is these are excuses people will use when they make a mistake and don't respect someone's safe words. And it's unfortunately a pattern that I've seen in these kinds of communities. And like, Minka, I think you could probably speak to how much this comes up as well. But it's definitely been an issue in some of the communities that I kind of evaluated before creating my own, because it was like really bad.
In the multiple communities that I've gone to around here, we actually, all of them did have a kind of generic thing where it was just like, yes, you can have your own safe words, but also like there are these safe words that are going to always apply no matter what, and it's green, yellow, and red.
Yep.
And so that was one thing that was nice, is across like all the different communities inside this larger community. It was just like, nope, like no matter what else, like if you say red, then everyone around you is going to know that like you've just asked to stop the scene. And so like if someone doesn't, like if the top doesn't, then like, you know, people will know they need to step in, because it's just like, if they try to be like, oh, well, that wasn't our safe word, it's like, it doesn't matter. That is a general safe word that goes 100% at all of these places.
Mm-hmm. That's really good to hear. So yeah, that's similar to what we did. So we had everyone's safe words on file as well. So it's like we had the green, yellow, red those are global community safe word things where it's like if anyone said any of those, you had to respect it.
Mm-hmm.
The other thing we did was put everyone's safe words and their like kinks on file. And if you were going to play with someone, you both had to like check out the card of that person.
Huh.
So there's no excuse of not knowing like what someone is or isn't into or what someone's hard limits were, because you literally had to sign and check out the card of the person you were going to play with, and they would magnetically attach to the wall in the room.
That is awesome.
And so it's like it's literally right there. Like if you're about to do something, you're not sure if this is like a thing a person's comfortable with. You know, move your eyes, look at the fucking card on the wall. You know what I mean? And so there's a zero tolerance, like no excuses policy for like breaching someone's hard limits was an automatic ban from the club. And there's no excuse for that. And it's like, look, if they tell you they're going to try something and they're into it, but it's not on their card yet, either they haven't taken the class for it or they need to update their card. And they need to like come in and do that and sign the paperwork beforehand.
Right. Like that's on them. Like, they can't do a split second like change to the card. It's like, no.
It's like, I really want to try like hard impact play. Well, it's like, well, it's not on your card. So I'm going to wait until you put it on your card officially. And like, it's like, and then, you know, the question I would ask is when someone came to me, it's like, hey, I want to add like hard impact play to my card. I'd be like, cool, have you taken the class yet? And I would like check the class records. And it's like, oh, you haven't taken the class for this. I can't let you add this yet. You should show up like next Thursday. We'll run a class. You can get it added then. But until then, like, do not engage in this kind of play. And that also prevented the whole, like, sometimes it's like people make split-second decisions. It's like, oh, actually, I really want to try that. And look, we've all been there, right? Like when the horny brain takes over, the horny brain takes over. You just, like... But this served as a really good safety net for everybody, because it's like, you know, I as a dom or I as a top would never do something that wasn't explicitly on someone's card as like a thing that they were into, that they've been cleared for to do safely. And I would expect that no sub would ask for something that wasn't on their card. And if they did, like, you know, that's the sub breaking a rule. Right. And they need to like go and get that taken care of first. And I have every right to refuse. It's like, no, I'm not going to do this because you don't have hard impact play on your card. And I'm not comfortable doing that. And at that point, like if the sub pushes further, like that's on them for trying to break someone else's limits and rules. So,
yeah, and I think that's really important because like a lot of times you do think about like, because unfortunately most of the time it is the DOMs that do cause the issues by trying to push subs into doing stuff. But like there are those instances too where it's like a sub could really find somebody they want to play with and be like, hey, like, I really want to do this thing, and keep pushing a Dom, and Dom's like, I'm not comfortable doing that, or I don't have the knowledge on how to do it safely. And if they keep pushing, like, that's also not okay. That's also trying to push and break consent.
Exactly. And, you know, on top of that, there's this, like, other whole part of it, which is, yes, there's going to be play that's close to the limit. What I mean is, like there's going to be play where it's like, oh, like, I want to try this, but it's like a soft limit, and I need to like have a long discussion with this person. And by having those like soft limit discussions, it's like very obviously highlighting on someone's card, like what's a soft limit for them, like what are the conditions under which they're okay with this thing. And what's really cool is for soft limit play of any kind, that discussion had to be mediated. So a senior member of the club had to be there for that talk to make sure that it actually happened. And then the terms were written down on a little, like, we had a little a sheet that you could file. So this is the other thing. So we maintained records for every person in the club. And there are a couple parts of your record. One's, of course, like just your personal profile of like who you are, you know, all those things, like if you paid your dues, like that kind of stuff. The record of classes you've attended and the scores of every class, right? A record of everyone whose card you checked out and played with. And then the record of like every soft limit conversation you've had with anyone. And the reason we do that is because like you have to almost force people to have those conversations and make sure it's done properly, because and so we had like templates where they'd have to like fill out like each thing together. And it's like, oh, like I'm okay with this kind of play under the following conditions. And like these kinds of things are like hard limits I don't want to break when I'm engaging in this kind of play. And then like so for example, you might say, well, okay, for impact play, like, oh, I'm okay with impact play as long as like I talk about it with you beforehand. please don't hit me with any hard objects. Whips and like other things like that are fine. Please don't leave marks, right? Like that might be like a disgust limit, but like we'd put those on file and both people would sign them, like saying, I understand, like this is the discussion we've had, like these are the limits we've agreed to. And the last part of the like safety element of this club is, if you were to break any of those limits, anything and everything in your file would be used against you, should like the other person choose to pursue any sort of legal action. Because at the end of the day, like we documented everything. There should have been no concern, like there should have been no like confusion or concern about not knowing exactly what the other person was or wasn't agreeing to.
Mm-hmm.
And if you cross those limits and the other person says that they want you out of the club, or that they want that like information that we have on file to pursue legal action, we will give it to them. And it was the only way to keep the club like honest and safe for everyone. Is that insanely strict? Yes. But like that's what kept it safe.
Well, yeah, and I think about like a lot of the people I've known, and it's just like, well, I can see so many of them being like, oh, this is too obnoxious, this is too much. It's like, I also can see that those are all the people that were constantly problematic and pushing lines, and basically the people trying to find those loopholes in the rules and stuff. Because what you've created is a place that is actually safe for people to come into and to explore and like find things out about themselves. Whereas the community that we had, like we have these people in power who are in their 40s coming down and trying to sleep with every 18-year-old girl that comes into the community, using their subs to try to manipulate these girls into coming over and then sleeping with them. And like what you've created is something that is actually safe, whereas there is this pretend illusion of safe that these other communities I've been in have had that weren't safe at all. And so, yeah, I would much rather have a place where it's like, all right, well, I might not be able to do this scene I want to do because like the rules there say, like this is not okay for public, so I'll just do that on my own, which, yeah, sometimes it's fun to have people watch you do stuff. Like that can be part of what gets you off. But like the reality is it's not just all about you, it is that whole thing of like, it's a community. And so if it is something that is doing more harm than good, it shouldn't be allowed. And I think that's amazing.
Thank you. It really does, like, it feels nice to hear people like understand the rules and be like, because there were definitely people when we interviewed them and explained the rules, they were just like, this sounds insane. This is too restrictive. This is too like, this is too pushy. You guys are like way too rigid.
It's like, thanks for rooting yourself out.
Yeah, it's like, well, that's cool. There's like other clubs you can join. Doesn't sound like this one's the right one, and that's fine. That's okay, right? Like we can have different spaces, different communities, but like I'd rather create safe ones and then give people the option of like, hey, if you want a safe place to play, like you can join this one and you can play, but like don't ruin it for others, and don't come into other people's spaces and tell them like, oh, the rules are too safe here and I don't want this. Can you just break the rules for me? It's like, no, we like as a community agreed to these rules. We're going to stick to them. Right.
And yeah, and if you want something else and it's not there, then make it. But like, if you don't do it, if like you're not smart about it and don't make it in the right way, then yeah, it's not going to work. So either you can play in the spaces that are created, and like judge on where your level of comfort is, or you can try to do it yourself. But like if you are actually there and not a safe person and try to create a safe space, like people are going to realize that and it's going to fail and you're just going to end up with nothing, which is how it should be. Like unsafe people should not be able to prey on other people in the community.
Exactly. And it all comes down to like at the end of the day we had like 60 people in the club. Over like the 3 years it grew from like 10 to 60, and many of them are still there now, and I think at this point we're closer to 90 or 100 people, last I checked, as people have like, as they leave school they leave the club as well, so like I'm only doing admin stuff at this point. Like I cannot participate in the club anymore, which is very sad. But I'll probably start another one here with the same rule set for adults and professionals like that are working, in the industry in like tech and other things like that. San Francisco is a wonderful place for that kind of thing. It's just like, again, some of the communities that are already established here are a little bit too
Old.
Okay.
Yeah.
Finding out that's where you are, be careful because Tribe is also there.
I'm well aware.
Okay, Tribe.
I've
Okay.
seen them. Yeah.
Yeah. I was inside Tribe. It's shit. Stay as far away from it as possible. Like the only good thing.
Disgust in your voice.
Oh my god, no! Like
Yeah.
I was ready to do anything I could to bring that thing down, and luckily they did a lot of that themselves. But really, the Utah chapter is the one that like basically fell apart. Nevada and California, so basically Vegas and San Francisco, are still running, but like those problems are still all there. And like the sad thing is because of how big they were, they did have a lot of connections to a lot of amazing teachers who like were experts in these different types of play. And so like, they'd be able to get classes and stuff because education was still a big thing for them, which is important. Like classes and everything are super important, but just the way it's run and the people in charge are corrupt and absolutely like should be stayed away from.
Yeah, it's not a safe place.
No,
I totally
it
get
is
that.
not.
And this is this is why I'm saying part of why I wanted to come here and talk about this is like to show people like one, this can be done. Like you can start a safe community from scratch. If you're willing to put in the effort, and take the time to create the class content, to like do things safely, to like reach out to experts for like one-on-one coaching and turn what they teach you into slide decks. Like you can absolutely teach an entire community from scratch. It will take time. Like this thing didn't scale up for like a year, right? Like for a year it was like 10 of us like building all the content, like playing with each other, experimenting, like trying out, like making sure like the rule sets made sense for like what we did. And like that was super important and really like that was the foundation. But it's like, part of why it's so openly talked about, here's how we like set up the rules, here's like what safety things we had in place, is so that for people in the future who want to replicate this, or people listening to this that are like, oh, I'd like to make one of these for myself, like half the answers you need are right there in this podcast episode. And hopefully people like are inspired to set up similar and equally safe communities elsewhere.
I hope so.
That are better for everyone if we have like a higher level of safety and a higher level of like what the expectations are, what the consent process is, like how are rule breakers dealt with, and it's like including like the onus of like the really cool thing about the documented part of this is like because you have soft consent or like soft limit consents like written down, because you have like things openly discussed, because you have like a history of who each person played with, and everyone had to like sign and hand over cards. Like if something does happen, it's really easy to like suss out what went wrong, right? You can go back through the records and be like, oh, like these two people played, it didn't go well, right? Like it's like, oh, they discussed these soft limit things, and like, oh, it says right here, like on the piece of paper, that they agreed to not leave marks, and then one person did, and it's like that may have been accidental. Like sometimes you can't tell like immediately day of that something's going to leave a mark, but it's like that's a warning, and that should go in their record as like a, hey, like they went too far once, and that means like one, the club will immediately take corrective action, which is like we'll have a chat with that person, and then we'll have them retake like the impact play class, right? And it's like, hey, like we need to like make sure that you recognize and understand how to do this safely. And if they don't, and there's a repeat offense, like we will just remove them from the club, because at that point, like I don't want to risk anyone else's safety. And at that point, also all those records will be turned over if like any of the people involved want to pursue legal action, because like it's like you have it all documented. Everyone knew what they were agreeing to.
right? And that stops, like, you could have some people who are like, oh, well, that means I'm not even allowed to make a mistake. And it's like, no, you are allowed to make a mistake. It's if you continue to make quote unquote mistakes, then there's a record of it. Like,
Exactly.
yeah, accidents happen. That's okay. But like, there's clear differences between accidents and repeated behavior.
Yeah, exactly. And you know, like, look, mistakes have been made, right? Like I told you, we had 2 or 3 minor safety incidences. It does happen, but it's like at least there's a clear understanding of like, hey, here's the process we follow when a mistake is made, right? And it's like, here's a, like, the club made a clear attempt to like teach that person to do this thing safely because they expressed wanting to continue that kind of play. And if they don't want to do that, if they don't want to take the class or whatever else, we just remove impact play from their card. It's like, okay, like, you've shown that you can't do this safely. Let's just remove it from your card. It will protect you. It will protect us. It'll protect anyone you interact with or play with. And that's better. So much better. And, you know, some people did take that option where they were like, oh, I clearly didn't feel like I did anything wrong here, but like this thing happened. And it's like, okay, yeah, like I see your point. Let's just remove it from your card and remove it from the card of the person who, like, you know, made the complaint as well. It's like, okay, like, let's not have you involved in. Because the other side of that was like, we also had a record of people who would like make complaints about a particular type of play. And it's like, if you're the sub in that situation and you don't want impact play that leaves marks, but even when it's very light marks and it's accidental, you continue to complain. It's like, maybe it's better that you don't engage in that kind of play at this club, right? Like, it's clear that your standard of, you know, because the problem is it's a sliding scale, right? It's like your standard of leaving a mark might be very different than mine, right? In my mind, that's like clear bruises, but in your mind, that might be like slight red marks from like where you got struck. And it's like, yeah, those are very different. And it's like, we could discuss them in detail. And that's fine. But it's like, at some point, if you're like the source of 90% of the complaints and like no one else has any complaints about anyone else making marks, like, maybe your expectations are different, and that's okay, but like, maybe this is not the best kind of play to engage in here, you know?
Right, like that's something maybe you go off on your own and you find someone who you can work with to find that level of play. But like, finding that level of play with like random people at a club is maybe not something that's going to work out for you here.
Exactly. And that's okay, right? Like, and I want to be very clear, this is not victim blaming. This is not at all anything like that. This is much more like, hey, like, the kind of play that you're looking for doesn't really exist here, right? Within these rules. So if you want someone with that light of a touch, like, we just like, either you discuss it ahead of time and you put it in your soft limits, right? And then you can basically say, you're allowed to tap me, just like, don't leave any marks, right? Or you just like remove it from your card entirely. And then that was the other thing we'd do. Sometimes we'd move things from like someone's like, I'm okay with this category to like a soft limit, and encourage them to be like, hey, like, what you're asking for is really specific, and this not like this is not how most people understand what you mean when you say this. So let's like have a supervised discussion and write down exactly what you mean so that they know.
Yeah, I think you nailed it on the head with calling it, you know, managing expectations. It's like that is important for DOMs and subs, like, because as much as I'm one of those subs who it's like, I don't really have many limits, I'm willing to try stuff, everything, like, I can't and won't just go into play with like any DOM being like, yeah, do whatever you want. Like, I still have to be aware of like safety things and that kind of stuff, because like I have as much responsibility to keep myself safe as like a DOM or a top does to like making sure they aren't doing harm. Like, there's that personal onus as well.
There's an onus on everyone to like communicate clearly, to be safe, and to like, to a large extent, you are responsible for your own safety, in as much as like it is your job to communicate with the other person, you know. And so, like, the other thing we sometimes run into is like in junior sessions, where like someone's trying something for the first time, and there's a supervisor. Like, every couple of minutes, usually the person supervising would check in and be like, "Hey, are you still good? Are you still comfortable?" Because what we found is a lot of first-time subs don't know when it's okay or not okay to use a safe word. and we're like, hey, like, every time we check in with you, like, we just want you to get in the habit of like using green, yellow, red, right? So it's like we check in and they'd be like green, and it's like, cool, keep going, right? Next check in like 5 minutes. um and it's like, that wasn't like there's not a hard rule of like, oh, you have to check in every 5 minutes. We just timed ourselves doing that as instructors watching a first time session, because we wanted to build that habit for the sub and the dom of like, hey, around every 5 minutes or so you should just check in and see how things are going. Because some people won't speak when they're like, even if they have the opportunity to, because they feel like they would be interrupting, or they feel like they would be breaking kind of the scene. And it's like, no, like, just get you used to this whole thing. It's like, you should speak up every 5 minutes or so. Just like say, hey, I'm green, we're good, like, let's keep going. Or maybe, hey, yellow, like, I need a 30-second break, or I need a minute. Give me a minute, right? Like, that's fine.
That actually answers one of the other big questions I was going to ask, is like, what happens if there is a scene that happens, they've both agreed and signed, but then, like, something happens and somebody after the fact goes like, oh, actually, like, I realized that this crossed a line or whatever. It's because a lot of people are like, oh, you can't withdraw consent after, and so they don't even pay attention to that kind of stuff. And it's like, well, but there is kind of a gray area. But like, what that is brilliant, because that actually, is empowering people to better be able to communicate if something all of a sudden changes. And obviously, like, there is processing that happens after a scene, and sometimes that happens for days, weeks, months, like, sometimes that can happen forever. But I feel like that is a very good step at helping empower people to feel comfortable speaking up. And
exactly.
And with the signing of the thing too, with the subs part, it's like, okay, well, this is what you signed, and you're saying now there was something that happened that you didn't feel was super consensual. So let's talk about it. Let's have a conversation. Like, did it actually break something that you had agreed to, or is it something else that came up that, like, maybe now more conversation needs to happen?
Exactly. And this is like super important, because like part of what happens is, even during aftercare, when people are like processing it, they might have other feelings attached to what happened, or what was done in a scene. And they might feel like, oh, actually, like, that didn't feel great. And even though I like agreed to it and consented to it, like, I feel bad that this happened, and the aftercare isn't soothing enough, right? And it's like, okay, well, one, like, we should talk about that. We should like figure out why. And then two, it's like put it on file, put it on your record of like, hey, like, this is the scenes that include this particular action or this particular activity make me super uncomfortable. And even if they like, it's like, okay, well, just add that to your hard limit card, and make sure that it's like very clear that, and sometimes like in those kinds of scenarios, it's like we just talk with everyone, right? Like, we talk with the dom, we talk with the sub, together and separately, like one-on-one. We review the paperwork, make sure like, was there something agreed to? Was there not something agreed to? Or is there a gap in the paperwork? Because sometimes it's quite literally, oh, we should have asked this question. We're going to put this on all the forms going forward. And again, like, if you're starting a new club, like, that's bound to happen. And we had one of those as well, where it's like we updated one of the forms because we realized that we hadn't put in any of the soft limit forms, like, how someone should be addressed when it came to degradation as a soft limit. It's like we had...
Okay.
So we had degradation, like, discussions of like what's okay, what's not okay, like what kinds of insults are fine, what kinds are not. But we accidentally, and this is totally my fault. I fully admit this is my fault. This is something we fixed immediately when it was brought to our attention. Like, didn't have a section in there for like which pronouns are allowed when degrading someone. And this is something that we only realized later. That's like, oh, some people like don't want their normal pronouns used when they are being degraded, and some people do, and some people are super uncomfortable if you like cross the two. Totally my fault. Something we fixed basically immediately when it was brought to our attention. But there's like a great example of like, hey, here's a paperwork error that like led to an issue between two people that was entirely not their fault, and we fixed all the paperwork going forward, and apologized profusely to the people affected. They're like, oh, we're really sorry, like, this one's on us,
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, that's That is really, and again, it comes down to like being willing to change, because like if you start something and you're like, these are the rules and like these are always going to be the rules and nothing will ever change, you're not fit to run anything really.
Exactly. And to everyone else who's like, if you're evaluating a club to join, like question the rules a bit, like think about why they were created, how they're set up, and really like have a deep sit down and think about, if I wanted to abuse these rules, could I abuse them? And if the answer is yes, that's probably a club you should stay away from.
And if you can find out information like, do the people who run this establishment, like, are they also holding themselves to these rules? Because if they're not, that's another huge red flag.
Yeah, the rules apply to everyone. It's like, so the instructor creating the class had to actually like test out the exams and like grade them and figure out like, what is a passing grade on bondage, like what's like a borderline not good grade, and what's like a failing grade on bondage, right? And it's like, so creating the content, creating the classes, teaching the classes, testing themselves. It's like for example, it's like, if I can pass the bondage class, but like someone I've literally not shown the slide deck to can also pass this test, it's probably not a good test. Like, it needs to be better than that to like be safe. And it's like, okay, like, so you kind of tweak the test until it's like, okay, there's like a real sense of, it is difficult, but you can pass it if you like prepare and learn.
Right.
Because other like it's only as good as your test is, in terms of like your level of safety and play in the club will only be as good as the testing and the teaching content. Otherwise, like, none of it will matter, right? It's not enough to create a test. You have to make a test that like actually demonstrates skill. One of the really cool ones we did for bondage was, one of the early tests is you have to like do shibari on an eggplant, and it turns out if you over tighten the ropes, like, you'll just squish the eggplant. and it's like, well, if you squish the eggplant, like, you fail the test. You got to try again.
That's fantastic.
But it's like, that's a good way to check safety. It's like, look, if you're going to tie up someone like tightly, you can't over tighten. You will cause harm. So like, how do you gauge that?
As long as it's an eggplant, not an eggplant.
Exactly.
Oh,
I thought that was a great joke.
That was a great joke.
Your enunciation was a little bad. Good joke, just poor execution.
Oh, shush.
Don't you shush me.
I'm learning from these guest episodes. I'm very good at making connections with people. I'm not very good at podcasts.
How so? I feel like, I don't know, man. I think you're actually really good at this too.
I feel like he's saying that because he hasn't spoken much this episode, and it's been an hour plus.
It's all good. I do feel like I want to include more of the rest of you in this episode that are hosting it. So like, because I know like Minka and I kind of went on this like super long tangent. So
that wasn't a tangent. That was the episode.
Honestly, I kind of did it on purpose because I wanted to see if Winter would stand up to Minka's BDSM knowledge.
No,
answer is yes.
I love younger generations, honestly, because like my generation is at that point where like we get it, but we've been fighting against the institutionalized a lot of it, but also fighting against the fucking boomers and Gen X for so long. Which, mind you, Gen X claims that they've been through the shit, and so they'll kick your ass if you fight them, but they are also often problematic, and sometimes that's just because of their inaction. So if you have Gen X who's like, don't fucking come at me because like I'll destroy you, just tell them to shut up and like either get with the program or get out. But yeah, no, like I'm fascinated to hear all of this, but I did hit a point where just now as well where I'm like, okay, like Puce and Alt need to now talk. I have clearly dominated this conversation.
See, that was a good joke.
Oh my god, that was a great joke. How, I guess like Puce and oh god, wait. Alt. Okay. It is just Alt, right? Like the key.
Oh,
got it.
yeah, alternative.
Got it. Yeah, so Pew's an old, like, I'm really curious to like hear your thoughts after kind of like witnessing what was like an hour long discussion about safety and like what you do to like actually set up a good safe BDSM club.
Hughes, you go first.
Well, like I said before, to be honest, we've had BDSM episodes before, so this was more of a me knowing Minka's had experience with BDSM clubs before and knows all the negatives, and seeing if a younger, newer club has learned from the previous mistakes of older clubs. And it seems like you've done a pretty good job, at least by Minka's standards.
Oh, thanks. I appreciate that. You know, I don't think we're perfect, and this is like one of the reasons that I also feel like these clubs are better when they stay smaller, for a lot of reasons.
Yeah.
And so, you know, this the reason that like I'm out here talking about a rule set and not being like, oh, by the way, anyone who wants to join, like apply here. It's because like I think it's better if people start their own and follow a similar template, but like make it the safest they can for themselves. Because like I'm sure there's stuff we got wrong. I'm sure there's stuff we could do better. So.
Well, and there's stuff that may be specific to, you know, locales and all of that kind of stuff. But like you said, you know, you said I don't think I have it perfect, and if you did, then it would be a flawed system. So
yeah, like I mean, honestly, anyone who tells you it's perfect, yeah, it's a red flag.
Yeah.
It's just like, I don't know about that, man. I don't think anything's ever perfect.
Well, I think that's a great place to wrap up. So, Winter, one thing I forgot to tell you is we do a thing called Last Call. So, final thoughts, questions, statements.
Sure. I guess like, so as a budding content creator, I've actually thought about this a little bit. And it's like, I don't know yet if I want to do like the lewd tubing side of things, or if I just want to do like VTuber thing with like a smaller community on the inside that's a little bit more, you know, involved in this community in the scene and in play. And I've thought about this a lot. I'm curious, like, what each of you think about it, because like this is another thing that's kind of like the LewdTuber versus VTuber thing is a thing that's been like on my mind for a while now.
Oh, we've had LewdTubers on here and talked to. Well, clearly we've talked to Juvie, but we've also had another VTuber called Mrs. Mummy, who labels herself as a LewdTuber. And I think I speak for all three of us when we say LewdTubing's totally okay. And if you don't want to be a LewdTuber, as long as you accept that LewdTubers are people too, then you're a good person.
Oh, for sure. Yeah, I appreciate that. Yeah, it's like it's a tough choice to make because it's like on one hand, I think the other content I want to make just doesn't fit that category very well. So, I want it to be way more inclusive and not be a LewdTuber, but at the same time, like I want to make a space for people who are interested in that within my community. And this is like, you know, one of the reasons I do like I read scripts and do like audio commissions, like, you know, sus audio commissions, I should say, is because like people have expressed interest in that kind of thing and they've asked if they can pay for it. And I'm, you know, I'm okay with that. If, as long as that what they send me is something I'm okay reading and consent to reading, like it's fine.
I will say for my part, like, cause being on like YouTube and Twitch and stuff is something that I've always wanted to do, and not necessarily as like, yeah, this is my financial income either, much like you, like just because this is something I like doing and I want to have fun and build like a really great community. But like I started doing YouTube like 10 years ago, and so I have I think about 2 years worth of videos. I think it was 2 years worth of videos on a YouTube channel, and then just like different things happened. And so I'm now at this point where I'm like really ready to jump back in and start doing VTubing. But I've kind of had that same thought of like, how do I want to do this? Because like I want to play the games, but I also like, you know, I want to be authentic to myself and be able to have this sexual side. And so I've kind of considered that as well. It's just like, do I have different things where it's like, oh, over here on Twitch, like it's the more wholesome stuff, but then it's like, oh, okay, well, if you want this other stuff where I can play like the adult only games on stream or whatever, like, you know, let's come over here. It's kind of I'm kind of in that same space where it's like, what exactly do I want to do with this? And I think that's kind of where I'm heading, is like more into being a LewdTuber myself, but like having obviously the what follows terms of service over on this site and doing that there, and then being like, okay, if you want the more like really lewd stuff, like let's move over here and do it.
Yeah, that's a good mindset to have, and like, you know, for me, it's like that's a subset of the things I do in the communities I'm part of, and like, I'm also like one of those, like, I'm a makerspace kind of person, right? Like I like to mod things, I like to build stuff on my own, use my hands to create really cool things, and that's like everything from like keyboards to custom toys, and everything in between. And it's like, okay, but like that kind of creative space is very different than like loot tubing in general. Mm-hmm. But then it's like, that's another part of the content that I want to make, is just, here's a cool thing I'm working on, or here's like a stream where I'm just like doing 3D design of an object that I want to create, and so more and more I'm leading towards, I think I'll just be a normal 18 plus VTuber, but I'll definitely keep my community 18 plus for like obvious reasons. And then it's like, for people who want it, like probably Patreon or some other service, you know, where that kind of content is okay. That's probably what I'll do.
I was going to say 18 plus, kind of like Juvie's community, where it's 18 plus just for the fact that sometimes it might get a little sus or a little lewd, but for the majority it's just regular content.
And as someone who has a lot of friends that are very kinky, and of course most of us are also very neurodivergent, like that same type of community is often very interested in just like seeing how things are made and watching people make things. So like, I don't think that, you know, you would have too much of a break in the community you've built between the two things.
Yeah, I would expect some of the same. It's really interesting that like some of the brightest, most like neurodivergent people I've met are also the ones that are like most into like BDSM and other things.
Right.
It's kind of funny that there's an overlap there, but I guess that's just part of human nature.
We're still figuring out how to understand humans and brains and stuff, and neurodivergence especially is still very not very well understood.
Exactly. Alta, I have a question.
What's up, bud?
How did this start? Like, how did this podcast start?
All right. So, in what fucking year is it? 2023? What the fucking hell am I? Yeah. 5 years ago, as the old page was dying out, and me and Puce were like, we want to keep doing this.
This was on Facebook too, by the way.
We figured it'd be a lot easier if there was a not text version of the thoughts and things you wanted to say. And then 2 years went past and we went podcast. Nice. And here we are now. That's the shorthand version, because the long version would take like an hour.
And
I'd love to hear more about it at some point.
And we were like, hey, two straight men should not host a R18 podcast. Let's get a nice lady. And Minka was like, you rang, and like, all right, we're done.
Yeah, they came over to the Discord channel and they're like, we'd love a female who's interested in doing the podcast. And I was like, do you know, that sounds fun. And then we did an interview, and now we're here.
And then to this day, the three idiots still talk together.
Speak for your fucking self.
That's really cool. Yeah, I am really happy that all of you are working on this. It's been a real pleasure to be here.
Glad someone is.
It's been really nice to just talk to all of you, and it's really cool that like we connected through Juvie's community and through Juvie, and that's, I think, it's a testament to like this podcast, is that it's made the rounds enough that like VTubers are recommending other VTubers should be here and should like participate. This is pretty sweet.
Well, and also on the other side, like I've already done like one collab with Juvie and a couple of her friends and stuff too. Like Juvie's apparently the good connection.
Wait, yeah, when did that happen?
Couple, like maybe a month ago. We all I played with Juvie and Shiro and lovely Selena, and we played.
How did I miss that? That's not fair. You've been on her stream and I haven't.
You know what? Good. I this is why we don't do live stuff, because I don't know what the fuck you gonna say. So I'm like, no, I gotta keep them in a box just in case.
Fair.
But no, I think it is something where it's like, obviously, like Juvie has been this crux point for both sides, and I think that is really cool. Like, that is one of my favorite things about doing this podcast is meeting new people. Like, I love it.
Summer of friendship. Yeah. Yeah. There's something way better, but I'm tired, I'm hungry, and I've got like 8 things to do.
Yeah, there's another
All
F word
right.
we could be using, but let's it's for another time, I suppose.
Nah, we don't. So here's my problem. I can't just do that with anyone. I gotta have a basis first. Like, you can't just be random woman number 47 off the street. No,
That's fair. That's fair.
gotta have standards. Not high standards, but standards.
And a connection of some sort. That is
At
very
the end
true.
of the connection.
Yeah.
All right. I am going to close out the lounge for the night. Everybody, please make your way out. Don't let the door slam on your way out. Winter, I hope you had a good time with us today.
Oh my God, he's doing the thing. There's a lounge reference.
Where can we find you?
That
God,
was
you're
going to
so
be
bad
after.
at this.
I was going to say, ask him if he had a good time. And
Don't
then
for-
have him
Don't
plug.
forget to tip the
Yeah.
waitresses.
So, you guys can find me at twitch.tv/wintercharmvt. I have not set up a community Discord yet. That is on the to-do list. And once that's up and running, it'll all be linked on the Twitch page. So I would say for now, that's where people should go. And like, hopefully, if the model is done in time, I'll do a debut stream in August. So yeah.
Sweet.
Man, what's that like?
All right. And as always, everybody can find us at the Lusty Lounge, because obviously you're listening to us somewhere. We are on Apple, Google, Spotify, you name it, we're probably there.
We're not on Stitcher because it's going down.
I don't even
Don't know
what
why
that is,
Stitcher's
though.
going. Fucking old man.
But we're places. Hopefully later this year, we're working on our YouTube and Twitch junk, so we might be there. As for everybody else, Juvie, did I forget to plug anything this time?
Man, Juvie's here? That's crazy.
Oh,
Where's she at? Where's she
Minka.
been hiding?
We brought up Juvie too much. Shush.
Juvie's amazing.
True. Minka, did I forget to plug anything?
Patreon, but there hasn't been an update in like months, so no. No, you didn't.
All right. Everybody have a good night. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.
Take care.